child psychologists will tell you that the average 7-year-old processes fear in 0.3 seconds. Their hands shake. Their lip quivers. They cry for their mother. But on a wet Thursday night in Jae-won, Seoul, inside a cramped convenience store that smelled of instant noodles and old newspapers, Janice Adaeze did none of those things. When a loaded gun swung toward the counter 2 feet from her face, she looked up from her homework. She looked at the gunman. She looked at his hands. And then, in a voice as flat and steady as poured concrete, she said, "The man behind you will kill you before you finish counting the money." It was the most terrifying thing anyone in that store had ever heard. Not because of what she said, because of how she said it. She was 7 years old. And watching from the shadows near the back freezer aisle stood the one man in all of Seoul who had made entire rooms full of armed and dangerous men fall completely silent, now unable to move his eyes from a child who had just done it better than he ever had. If you want to know how a 7-year-old Nigerian girl became the only thing the most feared Korean mafia boss in Seoul refused to lose, stay right here. Because this story is going to break something open in you. Like this video, hit subscribe, and let's go back to where it all began. The single fluorescent bulb above the counter at Sungwoo convenience store flickered every 11 seconds. Janice Adaeze had counted. She always counted things: the cracks in the linoleum floor, the number of steps from the door to the register, the seconds between her Auntie Ngozi's cough and the next one. Counting meant paying attention. And paying attention, Janice had learned before she was old enough to explain why, was the only reliable form of safety she had ever known. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Outside, the rain over Jae-won was not falling, it was attacking. It came at the plate glass windows sideways and in sheets, turning the neon signs across the narrow street into bleeding smears of pink and yellow that pooled and rippled on the wet pavement below. The shop smelled the way it always smelled at this hour. Instant ramen broth from the pot Ngozi kept warm on the back burner, old newspaper ink, and the faintly metallic bite of the night air pushing through the gap under the door. Janice was on her stool behind the counter. The one Auntie Ngozi had patted with a folded dish towel because the wood dug into the backs of her legs. Her composition notebook was open on the counter in front of her, and she was doing the things she did every night while Ngozi worked the register. She was drawing. Not her homework. She had finished that an hour ago on the floor of the back room. She was drawing the street outside, the blurred neon, the rain-soaked figure of a delivery man bent double against the wind, a pigeon sheltering under a shop awning. Janice drew everything she saw. It was her way of making the world stay still long enough to understand it. She was small for 7, slight-boned, dark-skinned, with wide mahogany eyes that sat in her face like they belonged to someone older. Her hair was in 2 puffs, secured with yellow rubber bands. She insisted on yellow, always. Her mother had used yellow. That was the end of the discussion. Auntie Ngozi was behind the opposite end of the counter, entering inventory numbers into a battered tablet, her reading glasses sliding down her nose the way they always did. Ngozi was a large woman, warm and fierce in equal measure, with the kind of laugh that could fill a room and the kind of exhaustion that lived in a person's shoulders when they have been working 3 jobs for 2 years and still counting. She loved Janice with a completeness that cost her something real. Janice knew this. She tried not to require too much. There were 2 other customers in the store. An elderly Korean man near the snack aisle was examining a bag of rice crackers with the focused seriousness of someone making a major financial decision. A young woman in a delivery uniform was standing at the refrigerated drink section, still in her rain-soaked jacket, too tired to choose. The store was quiet except for the hiss of the rain and the flicker of the bad bulb. And then there was the man in the back. Janice had noticed him the moment he walked in, the way she noticed everything. Not by looking directly, but by filing. He had come in 15 minutes ago without acknowledging the door chime, which most people did even unconsciously. He had not gone to a shelf. He had not gone to the counter. He had moved, with a particular kind of deliberate economy that Janice did not have a word for yet but understood instinctively, to the far end of the store, near the upright freezer units. He stood there now with his back to the shelving, facing the entrance. He was wearing a black coat, so dark it swallowed the light around it, and beneath it the white collar of a dress shirt that had no business being in a neighborhood convenience store at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday. He had not picked up a single item. He had not looked at his phone. He was tall. His face was sharp, defined jaw, deep-set eyes the color of strong tea, the kind of stillness in his expression that comes not from peace but from a long and disciplined suppression of everything that is not peace. He looked like a man who had not been startled in a very long time. Janice looked at him for 1 second, catalogued him, and went back to drawing. She had added 3 pigeons to her sketch of the awning across the street when the door opened. It was not the sound of a customer entering. Janice knew the sound of a customer entering. The chime. The brief cold gust, the shuffle of wet shoes. This was different. The door was kicked. It hit the inside wall hard enough to knock a display of phone cases off the hook beside it, and the sound it made was not a chime but a crack, and the cold air that came in with it carried 3 men and the particular quality of noise that Janice associated, from memory she did not like to examine, with something going very wrong. Everybody on the ground.
Right now. Get down.
The voice was young and cracked at the edges, the voice of someone who was performing confidence they did not actually possess. The man in the middle held a gun. It was small and dark and pointed at the room with a hand that was shaking badly. The man on his left held a length of metal pipe. The man on his right was moving wrong. Too fast, too loose, his eyes going in directions that did not track with what the rest of him was doing.
He was on something.
Whatever it was in charge of him. The young woman by the refrigerators dropped her bottle. It hit the floor and rolled. She pressed herself back against the glass doors and made a sound that was not quite a scream. The elderly man near the snacks crouched down slowly, clutching his crackers, his face gone the color of old paper. Auntie Ngozie's tablet hit the counter, and she took 2 steps backward, her hands going up, her breath coming in a sharp pull. Janice set her pencil down. She did not get off the stool. She did not put her hands up. She turned on the stool to face the room, crossed her arms over the counter's edge, and looked at the 3 men the way she looked at a maths problem she had already worked out in her head. Her feet, in their scuffed white sneakers, did not move. Her face did not change. The gunman had not seen her yet. He was screaming at Ngozi, waving the weapon in an arc that swept from the register to the elderly man and back. Get away from the counter. Open the register. Open it now. Ngozie's hands were shaking. She was trying to find the right key on the tablet to unlock the register function. Her fingers were hitting the wrong buttons. She said something in Igbo under her breath that was somewhere between a prayer and a curse. The man with the pipe moved toward the refrigerators. The young woman flinched away from him so hard she hit the glass with her shoulder. In the back of the store, the man in the black coat had not moved. But his right hand had slid to the front of his coat, and it was no longer visible. The gunman finally looked at Janice. He blinked. He had been expecting the stool to be empty, or for whoever was on it to be on the floor. He had not been expecting a small girl in a too large cardigan to be sitting with her arms folded, studying him with the mild, clinical interest of someone watching a bird through a window.
Hey!
He aimed the gun at her.
Get down!
Get on the floor right now. Janice looked at the gun. She looked at his hands around it. She looked at his eyes. Then she looked past him, very briefly, toward the back of the store. Then she looked back at the gunman and said, in a voice that cut through the noise in the room with the clean precision of something very cold and very sharp, "The man behind you will kill you before you finish counting the money." The room went still. Not quiet still. The kind of still that happens when something shifts in the air, and everyone present understands at the same moment that the situation has changed in a way they do not entirely understand yet. The gunman froze. He did not turn around immediately. His eyes stayed on Janice, and what moved through them in that half-second was confusion, then a flicker of something that was not quite fear but was moving in that direction. She was 7 years old. She was not afraid. She was telling him something. And the certainty in her voice was so complete and so devoid of performance that it arrived in the room not as a threat, but as a fact. He looked afraid of a fact. He turned. The man in the black coat had stepped out from the shadows of the freezer aisle. He had not drawn a weapon. He did not need to. He was simply standing there, his hands loose at his sides, his expression unchanged, and he was looking at the three men with the particular quality of patience that belongs to someone who has dealt with problems like this so many times that the dealing itself no longer costs him anything. The man with the pipe went rigid. The man on the uppers stopped moving. The gunman looked at the man in the black coat for 3 seconds. Then he looked back at Janice. Janice had not moved. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, steadily, completely, with no crack in her composure for fear to enter through. The three men left. They did not discuss it. They did not run, exactly. They moved with the urgency of people who have understood something and want to be somewhere else before they have to understand it more fully. The pipe hit the floor. The door swung behind them. The rain swallowed them. The room breathed. Ngozi was gripping the edge of the counter. Her knuckles had gone pale. She looked at Janice with an expression that contained, in equal measure, terror and awe and the exhausted love of a woman who has been managing the impossible for 2 years and is occasionally still surprised by the forms it takes. Janice picked up her pencil. She opened to a fresh page in her composition notebook. She began to draw. What she drew was the face of the man in the black coat. From memory. From a 3-second observation made across a crowded, chaotic room. She drew the sharp jaw and the deep-set eyes, the exact angle of the collar against the neck, the quality of stillness in his expression that she had noticed the moment he walked in and filed under important.
It was exact.
It was precise in the way that things drawn by people who see clearly and feel deeply are always precise. On the far side of the store, the man in the black coat looked at Janice for a long moment. He looked at the notebook in her hands. He looked at what she was drawing. Then he turned to the large, quiet man who had appeared in the doorway behind him, a man who had not been visible a moment ago and who now blocked the exit with the solid competence of someone whose entire professional existence was devoted to making problems stop. And he said, quietly in Korean, "Find out who she is." The large man, who would have been introduced, in other circumstances, as Adaeze, and whose broken nose and mild expression concealed a loyalty that had been tested and proven over 11 years, nodded once. The man in the black coat looked at Janice one more time. Janice did not look up from her drawing. Kang Jae-won walked out into the Itaewon rain. He did not drink convenience store coffee. He did not, as a rule, stand in cramped neighborhood shops at 9:47 p.m. on a weeknight. He had been there because the building across the street housed a union official who owed the Jae-ho syndicate a phone call he had been avoiding, and Jae-won had preferred to wait somewhere unremarkable rather than have Tae-sik retrieve the man from his apartment in a way that would require cleanup. It had been a detour, a minor, unmemorable errand in an evening full of more pressing things. He sat in the back of his car now, a dark armored saloon that attracted no attention in Itaewon because it looked like the cars driven by the security details of the business executives who occasionally visited the district's more discreet establishments. Tae-sik was in the front seat, one hand on the wheel, not driving yet. "Boss," Tae-sik said. He was looking at his phone. "The girl. Her name is Janice Adaeze. Nigerian national. 7 years old. Her aunt works the night register at the store, Ngozi Adaeze, on an expired visa. No other family registered in the country. No school enrollment on record for the child. No legal identity in South Korea at all. It's like she arrived and disappeared at the same time." Jae-won was looking out the rain-slicked window at the smear of neon reflected on the wet street. He was turning a silver coin through his fingers, a habit, mechanical and unconscious, the way other men cracked their knuckles. He stopped turning the coin. "A ghost," Tae-sik suggested, watching the boss in the rear-view mirror with the careful attention of a man who had learned to read silences accurately. "Or someone with something to hide." Jae-won shook his head, almost imperceptibly. He was replaying the scene in his mind, not the robbers, not the resolution. The girl. The way she had looked at the gunman. The way she had not moved. The way her voice had carried across that room with the absolute, unperformable certainty of someone who has already calculated the outcome and is simply announcing it. She was 7 years old. His jaw tightened. He closed his hand around the coin. A 7-year-old does not look at a loaded weapon with that quality of stillness unless stillness is the only thing she has had left for a very long time. What did you just say about the visa? He asked. Expired, Tae-sik said. Immigration flagged it 4 months ago, but the case hasn't moved. The system is backed up.
Could move any day.
Kang Jae-won, who controlled the Incheon Port District, 3 city council members, and enough leverage across 14 government departments to redirect a foreign shipping inspection on 12 hours' notice, looked out at the rain. Put money in the aunt's account, he said. Anonymous. Enough for 2 months' rent and food. And find out which school district that building falls in. Get the child enrolled. Tae-sik's hand paused over his phone. Boss, he said, in the careful tone of a man who was not exactly objecting but was making sure the instruction had been given deliberately. This isn't our. I know what it isn't, Jae-won said. Tae-sik nodded. He began to type. In the front seat, in the silence that followed, he allowed himself one thought that he would not have said aloud under any circumstances. In 11 years, he had never seen Kang Jae-won's hand stop moving when it didn't need to. He put the car in gear and pulled out into the rain-soaked street. Behind them, in the Sungwoo convenience store, a small girl with yellow rubber bands in her hair was still drawing. The page in her composition notebook was almost full. She was drawing the face of a man who had not yet decided what she meant to him. She had already decided what he was. She could tell by the way he stood, back to the wall, facing the door, watching everything, that he was the most dangerous person in any room he entered.
She had used that tonight.
She hoped she would not need to again. She was fairly sure she would. She turned to a fresh page and kept drawing. The silence after the robbers left was the kind that settles into a room like sediment, heavy, uncertain, still moving long after the thing that disturbed it was gone. Ngozi Adaeze gripped the counter's edge with both hands and stood very still, the way a person stands when their body has not yet caught up to the news that the danger has passed. Her reading glasses had slid all the way off her nose during the commotion and were dangling by their cord against her chest. She was breathing the way a person breathes after running a long distance, in controlled, deliberate pulls, counting herself back down. The young woman by the refrigerators had sunk to the floor with her back against the glass door. The elderly man near the snacks was still crouching, still holding his crackers, still deciding whether to stand. Janice picked up her pencil. Ngozi looked at her. Janice, she said, and her voice came out wrong. Too thin, stretched over something that was threatening to come apart. Baby, are you? I'm fine, Auntie, Janice said. She was already drawing. Her hand moved across the page steadily, tracing from memory the angle of a jaw, the particular quality of darkness in a pair of deep-set eyes. Ngozi crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and put both arms around her niece, pulling her off the stool and against her chest. Janice let herself be held. She kept the notebook away from the embrace so the page wouldn't crease. She was drawing the man in the black coat. Ngozi was shaking. Janice was not. This was not a new arrangement between them. After a while, after the elderly man had finally stood and paid for his crackers without making eye contact with anyone, after the young woman had quietly let herself out into the rain, after Ngozi had locked the front door and turned the sign and sat down heavily on the stool with a cup of tea she'd made and then forgotten to drink, after all of that, Janice turned the notebook around and showed her aunt what she had drawn. Ngozi looked at it for a long time. That's the man who was in the back, she said finally. Yes, Janice said. Did you see him properly? In all that? I see everything, Auntie. Ngozi looked at the drawing. It was not a child's drawing. The proportions were exact, the shading deliberate, dark eyes rendered in careful pencil crosshatch, a jaw defined by a single clean line, something in the expression that Ngozi could not name but recognized. The look of a man who is always the most dangerous thing in a room and has long since stopped finding this remarkable. Who is he? Ngozi asked. Janice took the notebook back. I don't know yet, she said. She turned to a fresh page. Outside, the rain had eased to a fine persistent mist that blurred the street lights into soft halos. Somewhere 2 blocks east, a dark armored car was pulling away from the curb, carrying the most feared man in Seoul and a question he could not set down. Tae-sik had sent the files to the secure tablet. Jae-won had read them twice. He had looked at the school photograph, a small girl with serious eyes and yellow rubber bands, standing in a row of children with the particular alertness of someone who has learned to always know where the exits are. Find out who she is, he had said. But Tae-sik had already found out who she was. The file was 14 lines long. It ended abruptly, the way files end when a person has been swallowed by a system that does not know what to do with them. No school enrollment. No legal status. No forward plan. Just a 7-year-old and an aunt on an expired visa and a notice that had been sitting in an immigration queue for 4 months doing nothing. Jae-won closed the tablet. He looked out at the rain-soaked city. He had built an organization that controlled the city's ports, its gambling networks, its supply chains, its silence. He had leverage over 14 departments of government. He could make a shipping inspection disappear in 12 hours. He was thinking about yellow rubber bands. Dig deeper, he said quietly to Tae-sik. I want to know everything. And get the enrollment sorted by Friday. Tae-sik said nothing. He drove. In the rearview mirror, his eyes said everything he would not. The silver coin resumed its passage through Jae-won's fingers. But his hand, for the rest of the drive, was not entirely steady. The Jae-ho Syndicate's operational headquarters occupied the top 2 floors of a glass and concrete building above the port district, from which, on a clear day, you could see container ships moving through the Han River estuary, like slow steel cities. Jae-won had chosen the location deliberately. He liked to see the things he controlled. He arrived at 7 a.m. and found Tae-sik already at the long table, 3 folders open in front of him, a cup of black coffee at his right hand that was still steaming but that he had not touched. Tae-sik did not eat or drink during briefings. He considered it a form of discipline. Jae-won had stopped questioning it a decade ago. The briefing took 9 minutes. Janice Adaeze, 7 years old, Nigerian national. Born Lagos. Mother, Adora Adaeze, schoolteacher, deceased 18 months ago, illness. Father, unknown and unregistered. No living relatives in Nigeria with legal standing or financial means to take the child. Aunt Ngozi Adaeze arrived in South Korea on a work visa 3 years ago, took whatever employment she could find, cleaning company, logistics sorting, the convenience store night shift. She had been supporting herself and, for the past 14 months, Janice, on a combined income that Tae-sik's accountant had calculated left approximately 40,000 won per month for non-essential expenditure. 40,000 won. Less than $30. She has no legal right to keep the child in the country, Tae-sik said. The visa expired. If immigration processes the flag, they take the girl into state custody while the aunt is deported. There's no Korean family, no sponsoring institution, no established guardian. She would go into the child welfare system. Tae-sik paused. The waiting period for international cases is long, Jae-won said. Very long. Jae-won was standing at the window. He had his back to the table, which he almost never did during briefings. His hands were clasped behind him. Below, a cargo truck was making a slow reverse into a loading bay, guided by a man with orange signal wands whose arm movements were a private, patient language. And the immigration flag, Jae-won said. Who filed it? Tae-sik's pause was brief, but audible. It came from inside the department. One of our contact offices. Jae-won turned from the window. Tae-sik met his gaze, without flinching. Someone in our network flagged the aunt's visa for priority processing. It moved the case up the queue. Without the flag, it would have sat for another year at least. With it, Tae-sik checked the file, 2 to 3 weeks. Maybe less. Jae-won said nothing for a moment. He was looking at Tae-sik with the particular quality of attention he reserved for information that had changed the shape of a problem. Who, he said. I'm working on it, Tae-sik said. It was routed through 2 intermediary accounts. But I'll find it. Jae-won walked to the table and picked up the photograph of Janice. The school photograph. Yellow rubber bands. Eyes like a judge. He set it back down. Send money to the aunt's account today, he said. Anonymous routing. 2 months operating costs, calculated at comfortable, not subsistence. And contact the district education office. The child needs a school enrollment by Friday. Use the Mapo address. I'll have the building manager expect a call. Tae-sik's pen was moving. He did not look up. And a guardian filing? Jae-won picked up his coffee. We'll need an identity document for the child.
Clean.
Nothing that ties back to us directly, but solid enough to hold up to a school administration inquiry. Tae-sik wrote this down also. There was a silence that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. Boss, Tae-sik said, in the careful, measured tone he used when he was about to say something he had calculated the risk of saying. This is considerable resource for a child alone in a city that doesn't know she exists, Jae-won said. He said it without heat. It was not a rebuke. It was a clarification. Tae-sik nodded. He understood the distinction. The briefing ended. Tae-sik gathered his folders. He was almost at the door when Jae-won spoke again. The person who flagged the visa, Jae-won said. Find them before the end of the week. Tae-sik stopped. He turned. His expression had changed, not dramatically, but in the way that a sky changes when a front is moving in. Something had occurred to him.
You think it's connected, he said.
To last night. Jae-won was already reading the next file on his desk. Find them, he said again. Tae-sik left. In the elevator going down, he stood very still and thought about the fact that someone inside the Jae-ho syndicate had deliberately accelerated a visa flag on a woman who happened to work in the store where Kang Jae-won had been standing, unremarked and anonymous, on a Thursday night. And about a child who had warned a gunman about the man behind him before Jae-won had done anything to suggest he was worth warning about. By the time the elevator doors opened, Tae-sik had the cold, settling feeling of a man who has understood that he is at the beginning of something, and that the beginning is worse than he thought. The red notice was taped to the door, at a diagonal, the way official documents are taped by people who are in a hurry and do not consider whether anyone they love might come home and find it like this. Janice stood at the bottom of the 4th floor landing and looked up at it. She had known something was wrong 3 steps from the top, because the hallways smelled different. Official, synthetic, the particular cold air of a process that had already been completed and did not require anyone's consent. She climbed the last 3 steps. She read the notice. Her Korean was functional and particular, learned from television and street signs and the conversations of people who did not realize she was listening. She understood enough. She sat down on the step. She opened her notebook. She drew the notice. Every word of it. The official seal, the case number, the date, the department stamp in the lower right corner. She drew it with the same precision she drew everything because that was how she processed the world, not by crying into it, but by recording it. Crying changed nothing. Documentation was at least accurate. She sat there for 3 hours. Tae-sik found her at 20 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. He had been watching the building from the street in a car that attracted no attention, the way all of Jae-won's cars attracted no attention, and when he saw the small figure come up the street and stop at the building entrance and not come back down, he had waited the appropriate amount of time before going in. He climbed the stairs and found her on the landing with a notebook open on her knees, still drawing, her school bag propped against the wall beside her. Janice looked up. Are you one of the men who work for the man in the store?
She said.
Tae-sik looked at her. He had a broken nose and a face that had been rearranged once or twice over the years, and he was not a person that children usually looked at directly. This child was looking at him directly. Yes, he said, because he had tried to construct an alternative answer on the stairs and had not managed to make one. Janice closed her notebook. She picked up her school bag and stood. Then take me to him, she said. Tae-sik called Jae-won from the landing while Janice waited at his side, her bag on her back, her notebook under her arm. She did not fidget. She did not look at the notice again. She was finished with the notice. She had drawn it. It was recorded. Now there was the next thing. The drive across the city was quiet. Tae-sik drove. Janice sat in the back seat and looked out the window at Seoul moving past, the elevated expressways, the Han River gray and wide below them, the glass towers of the financial district catching the low afternoon light and throwing it back in long angular strips. She had not been to this part of the city before. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, carefully, committing it to a page she would draw later. Jae-won's building had a lobby with a security desk and 2 men who did not look like security but were. Tae-sik exchanged 4 words with one of them, and then took Janice up in an elevator that was very quiet and smelled of something expensive she did not have a name for. The office was large and gray and disciplined, the way rooms are when they belong to people who do not want to be read through their furniture. The window behind the desk looked out over the port. Cargo cranes stood against the pale sky like enormous patient animals. Jae-won was standing at the window when they came in. He turned. Janice walked across the room, pulled out the chair on the visitor's side of the desk, sat down, and put her composition notebook on the desk surface with the deliberate intention of a person who has an agenda. Jae-won looked at the notebook. He looked at her. "You owe me," Janice said. He said nothing. "Your face scared them away before my words did," she said. "I used you. That means you were useful to me. I helped you without asking. That means you owe me." She looked at him steadily. "My Annie has been taken. The notice says it's an immigration issue. I need someone to fix it." Jae-won sat down slowly across from her. He looked at the 7-year-old on the other side of his desk. The serious eyes, the yellow rubber bands, the notebook placed on the surface like a document to be signed, and felt something move through him that he had no immediate category for. He had been presented with requests across this desk by men twice his size who had been afraid to make them. This child had walked across the city, climbed into a stranger's car, ridden an elevator to the 31st floor, and opened negotiations. "What's your name?" he asked, though he knew. "Janice Adaeze," she said. "And I already know yours." She had drawn him from memory before she knew his name. She knew it now because she had asked the man driving the car, and Tae-sik, to his own apparent surprise, had told her. She folded her hands on the desk. "Can you fix it?" she asked. Jae-won looked at her for a long time. "No," he said. The air in the room changed. Janice's face did not. "I can't undo what's already been processed," he said. "Your aunt's case is closed. But I can make sure you're not alone." Janice was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window, at the cranes against the sky. Then she looked back at him. "Okay," she said simply. She reached across, picked up her notebook, and held it out toward him. She had opened it to the drawing she had made the night before. His face. Exact. Undeniable. "I drew you," she said. "Before I knew who you were." Jae-won took the notebook. He looked at his own face rendered in careful pencil by a 7-year-old in a cramped convenience store during a robbery. Looked at the things she had seen in him that she had put on the page. The stillness. The controlled weight. The quality of a man who has made himself into something impenetrable and has not, until this moment, stood across from anything that looked through it without effort. He handed the notebook back. "You can stay," he said. "I'll arrange it." Janice took the notebook. She stood, pulled her bag over her shoulder, and looked at him one more time. "Thank you, Mr. Kang," she said. Then, with the gravity of someone twice her height, "Don't be late." She walked to the door, where Tae-sik was waiting. Jae-won sat at his desk for a while after they had gone. The port cranes moved outside the window in their slow, purposeful arcs. He had not been called late for anything in 11 years. By 4 o'clock the next afternoon, Janice Adaeze existed. Not fully, not yet, but enough. A name on a document. An address in the Mapo district. A school enrollment confirmation from Tae-sik's contact in the district education office, arriving by secure message at 3:47 p.m. with the particular brisk efficiency of administrative processes that have been helped along by people who know which levers to press. Jae-won had done it in one afternoon. He had told himself it was a debt settled, a ledger balanced. He had used the word investment twice in his internal accounting, once when authorizing the document preparation, once when approving the Mapo apartment. The building was clean, above a bakery, owned by a property management company that was managed by a holding company that was managed by a trust that had no visible connection to the Jae-ho syndicate. The building manager had received a call from Tae-sik and had asked no questions. He was a wise man. Jae-won went to check the apartment at 6. He told Tae-sik to wait downstairs. He told himself this was a security assessment. He walked up to the 3rd floor and knocked once. The door opened. Janice was already there. She was standing in the small entrance hallway in her school cardigan and her scuffed sneakers, and she was holding her composition notebook, and she was looking at him with the expression she always wore, that clear, measuring attention that sorted everything it landed on into columns it alone could read. Behind her, the apartment was sparse but functional. A bed, a desk, a kitchen counter, a window that looked out over the bakery roof and the narrow street below. "It's good," Janice said, before he could speak. She stepped aside to let him in. "The window is good. I can see the whole street from it. And it smells like bread in the morning." She said this last part without particular sentiment, but Jae-won heard something in it, the careful inventory of a child cataloging a reason to stay, filing it against the possibility that staying might not last. He walked to the window. Below, the bakery sign was lit, the street quiet, a cat moving along the gutter with considered purpose. Janice appeared at his side. She held up the notebook. She had already drawn the view. Bakery roof. 3 pigeons on the ridge. A single power line crossing the frame. The cat. "It's good here," she said again. "Thank you, Mr. Kang." He looked at the drawing. Then at her. Then at the drawing again. He left quickly. In the elevator going down, he put his hand against the wall. It was not steady. He registered this with the detached precision of a man monitoring a system he had relied on for 20 years. His hand had been steady through 11 boardroom confrontations, through 4 territorial disputes that had required the kind of resolution that did not appear in minutes, through the night his father was killed and Jae-won had stood at the barber shop doorway and looked at what remained and made the first in a long series of decisions that had brought him here. His hand had been steady through all of it. It was not steady now. He stepped out of the elevator into the building lobby and found Tae-sik waiting with his hands clasped and his face set to neutral. Tae-sik's neutral was comprehensive and well-practiced. It covered a great deal. "The enrollment is confirmed for Monday," Tae-sik said. "Uniform has been arranged. The building manager has the emergency contact details. He'll call my number if there are any issues." "Good," Jae-won said. They walked to the car. Jae-won got in. He did not speak for a moment. Outside, the street was doing what streets did at this hour, filling with the specific noise of people going from one necessary place to another. "The flag on the aunt's visa," Jae-won said. "Did you find the source?" "Not yet," Tae-sik said. "The routing is clean. Whoever did it knew how our contact network is structured. They knew which office to use. Which means it was someone inside." "Yes." Jae-won said nothing further. He picked up the silver coin and did not start turning it. In his building, 2 floors below the Jae-ho Syndicate's main operations office, Park Sung-jin was ending a phone call. He was Jae-won's second-in-command, lean, composed, precise in the way that precision can be either a virtue or a threat depending on whose interests it serves. He had been with the syndicate for 8 years. He had been patient for all 8 of them. He set his phone down. "The boss has a soft spot," he said to the man sitting across from him, whose name did not matter very much because he was the kind of man who performed tasks rather than made decisions. The man nodded. Sung-jin straightened his cuffs. He was a man who kept his expressions as clean as his documentation. "Soft spots," he said quietly, "are doors." He picked up the next file on his desk. He was already thinking about which key to use. Jae-won told himself he was checking on an investment. It was a Wednesday. He had told Tae-sik he needed to pass through Mapo to review a property matter. Tae-sik had written this in the schedule without comment. This was also, Jae-won suspected, because Tae-sik was a man of exceptional situational intelligence who had long since learned which observations to commit to paper and which ones to hold, quietly, somewhere else. The apartment smelled of bread from the bakery below, exactly as Janice had predicted. She opened the door before he knocked, which he noted without remarking on. She was at the desk, doing homework. She pointed at the armchair in the corner, the one the building manager had furnished the apartment with, upholstered in faded blue fabric, as though she had been expecting him and had already assigned him a seat. He sat. "Why do people work for you, if they're afraid of you?" she asked. She did not look up from her homework. Jae-won looked at the side of her face. "Because they are afraid of what happens if they don't," he said. Janice considered this. She wrote something in her exercise book. "That's not the same as wanting to," she said. He did not answer. He looked at the window. 3 pigeons on the bakery ridge, as advertised. He did not stay long. He told himself on the way down that he would not come next week. He had more pressing matters. The Sungjin question was still unresolved. There was a shipping contract dispute that required his direct attention. There were always 17 things that required his direct attention. He came back the following Wednesday. Janice was drawing when he arrived. She let him in without ceremony, returned to her stool by the window, and continued her work. They sat in a silence that was, he realized after several minutes, entirely comfortable. He could not remember the last time he had been in a room with another person in a silence that was comfortable. "Did you choose to be scary?" she said eventually, not looking up from the page. "Or did it just happen?" He was quiet for long enough that it was its own kind of answer. "It just happened," he said. Janice nodded. She turned the notebook to show him what she was drawing. Not his face this time. A street scene, 2 men outside a shop. One gesturing, one listening. She had caught the body language with precision that went beyond technique into something more intuitive. "That happened to me too," she said. "Being scary. I didn't choose it. I just needed people to stop." He sat forward, his forearms on his knees, and looked at her properly for the first time since he'd arrived. She met his gaze. In her face was something he recognized, not because he had ever seen it in a child, but because he had seen it in the mirror a long time ago, before the mirror stopped telling him things he wanted to know. The look of a person who has built composure out of material that was never meant for that purpose, and has been living inside it ever since. He sat down properly. For the first time. The 3rd Wednesday, she showed him a page in the notebook she had been saving. It was a drawing of a man sitting in a large chair. Around him, smaller figures stood with their backs to him, facing outward. Not protecting him, facing away from him. Every single one of them oriented toward everything except the man in the center. "That's you," she said. He looked at it. "Nobody looks at you," she said. "They just look away from you." He set the notebook down on the desk carefully, the way you set something down when you are afraid that how you handle it will say too much. He left earlier than usual. The following Wednesday, he did not come. He drove past the bakery street at 6 p.m. and told Tae-sik to keep moving. Tae-sik kept moving. In the rear view, Jae-won did not look at the window with the 3 pigeons. That was also, Tae-sik understood its own kind of answer. He said nothing. He drove. 3 days later, he intercepted a message from a routing channel that had been flagged for Sungjin's associate network. Someone had been watching the Mapo building, photographing arrivals, school departure times, the girl's route. He brought it to Jae-won at 7 in the morning. Jae-won read it once. He set it down. His jaw was set in the way it set when he had already decided something and was simply determining the order of operations. "Move up the schedule," he said. "I want her relocated to the secondary address within 48 hours. And I want eyes on the Mapo building round the clock until further notice." Tae-sik nodded. "And find Sungjin's source," Jae-won said, and this time the quiet in his voice had a different quality, the quality of something that has been patient long enough and is now done being patient. "Find them today." Janice had gone down to return a bowl. This was the small, ordinary fact at the center of everything that followed. The building manager's wife had sent up soup the previous evening, a kindness, quietly performed, and Janice, because she had been taught that things borrowed required returning, and that gratitude was demonstrated through action rather than words, had rinsed the bowl and was carrying it downstairs at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning, when she should have already left for school. She heard them on the landing below. 2 men. Standing close together in the space between the 2nd and 1st floor, where the stairwell turned, and the angle of the wall created a brief, acoustically sheltered pocket that people sometimes used without knowing they were using it. She heard them before she saw them, and she stopped 3 steps above the turn and did not move, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned, long ago, that the difference between knowing something and not knowing it was often just a question of whether you stayed still long enough to hear it. She recognized one of the voices. She had heard it the night of the robbery, standing near the freezers, saying something to another man in low, rapid Korean that she had filed away because she filed everything, particularly things that seemed designed to be unfiled. She could not hear everything. The soup bowl was warm against her palms. She did not adjust her grip. She heard the prosecutor. She heard, not the boss. She heard, Sung-jin says it holds up. She heard, very clearly, because the man saying it raised his pitch slightly on the word as though it were still remarkable to him. The girl drew his face. Then the other man said something she could not catch, and the first man said, "Doesn't matter. She's just a child." Then footsteps, moving down and away. The building door opened and closed. Janice stood on the stair for a moment. Then she went back up, returned the bowl to her own kitchen, sat at her desk, and opened her composition notebook to a fresh page. She drew both men. She drew them with the precision she brought to everything, the shape of a face, the particular set of a jaw, the way one man stood with his weight on his left foot and the other kept his right hand in his jacket pocket. She drew the phone she had seen in the second man's hand, silver casing, a red cover that was partially peeled at the corner. She wrote, in her careful mix of Korean and English, the words she had retained, bracketed with question marks where she was uncertain. When she was finished, she looked at what she had written. She understood some of it and not all of it. She was 7, but she understood enough. She understood the word prosecutor. She understood the name Sung-jin, which she had heard before. In this building, in Tae-sik's phone conversations when he forgot she was in the next room, in the careful way adults around Jae-won did not say it unless they needed to. She understood. This was about Mr. Kang. She picked up her school bag. She went to school. She sat through mathematics and language class and a period of physical education in which she was required to run in circles, which she did without complaint. She ate her lunch. She was, to all visible purposes, exactly what she appeared to be, a 7-year-old in a navy uniform with yellow rubber bands in her hair, going through the ordinary choreography of a school day. Inside, she was waiting for Wednesday. Jae-won came at 6. She showed him the page. The temperature in the room changed the way it changes in the moment before weather arrives, a pressure shift, a change in the quality of the air, something in the light. He looked at the drawing of the phone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. She watched him understand it. She watched the understanding move through him and become something colder and more deliberate than the understanding itself. Sung-jin's private line, he said. The words were not for her, exactly. They were for the room. Someone try to hurt you? Janice asked. Jae-won looked at her. Not me, he said, which was only partially true, and they both knew it. He stood. He was already in the other place, the place she saw him go to when the world outside the apartment pressed in. The calculated, impenetrable place. Don't go to school tomorrow, he said. Janice looked at him steadily. Is someone going to try to hurt me? She said. He did not answer immediately. He looked at her face, at the composure that had not wavered, at the eyes that were asking the question precisely, with no performance of fear around it, just the request for accurate information. Not while I'm breathing, he said. It was the most personal thing he had said to her. Janice held his gaze for a moment. She reached out and turned the notebook's page toward him. The drawing she had made tonight, the one she had done after school while she was waiting. It was of him at the window, looking out at the cranes. His back to the room, his hands clasped. From behind. The loneliest possible angle. She had drawn it from memory, from a day she had observed him without him knowing she was watching. He looked at it without speaking. Then he called Tae-sik. They moved at midnight. Tae-sik came to the door quietly, the way he did everything, and Janice was already awake and already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed in her school cardigan with her school bag on her back and her composition notebook in her lap. She had been awake since 10. She had heard the car downstairs, and she had understood what it meant without being told, because she always understood what things meant before being told. Tae-sik carried her bag. She carried the notebook. She always carried the notebook. The safe house was in Hongdae, a district she had not been to, known for its music and its crowds and its complete indifference to the specifics of who came and went. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of old paint and cooking oil and the particular anonymity of places that do not ask for names. Inside, a cot, a hot plate, a table with one chair, a window that looked directly at a brick wall. Janice, went to the window. She stood at it for a moment. Then she sat on the cot and opened her notebook and began to draw the brick wall. Tae-sik watched this happen. He was a man who had seen a great many things and had long since trained himself to carry them without visible weight. But there was something about the child sitting on the edge of a cot in the middle of the night, drawing a brick wall with the focused serenity of a person who has decided that what they are looking at is worth understanding. There was something in that which pressed against the interior of his chest in a way he would not have reported to anyone. He stayed.
This was not the plan.
The plan was to install her, confirm the location secure, and return to Jae-won's side before 2 a.m. There was work. There was always work. He called his position in and told them he was on site.
He sat in the chair by the door.
Janice drew. After a while she said, without looking up, "Does he ever sleep?" Tae-sik blinked. "Who?" "Mr. Kang." Tae-sik considered the question. "Not much," he said. Janice nodded, as though this confirmed something.
"Does he eat?"
"Yes." "Does he?" She stopped. She turned a page.
"Does he have anyone?" She said.
"Not employees. Anyone." Tae-sik was quiet for a moment. "He is a very particular kind of man," he said finally, which was the most honest answer he could give within the boundaries of loyalty and discretion and 11 years of keeping his own counsel. Janice looked at him then. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, completely, directly, without deflection.
"He has you," she said.
Tae-sik said nothing. She went back to drawing. At 3 a.m. the hot plate's heating element ticked quietly in the silence. Janice was asleep on the cot with the notebook under her cheek, her hand still curled around the pencil. Tae-sik sat with his back to the door and looked at the brick wall through the window. In the Jae-ho building across the city, Kang Jae-won was sitting in his office with no lights on except the desk lamp and 3 open files and the phone he had held in his hand for 6 minutes without calling the number on the screen. The number belonged to a prosecutor named Lim Byung-soo, 44 years old. Clean record, meaning that Jae-won had looked and found nothing, which in Seoul's legal landscape was itself a remarkable thing. Lim had prosecuted 3 cases adjacent to the syndicate's operations over the past decade and had done so with the specific integrity of a man who understood that he was being watched and had decided not to be interested in what watching him would cost. Jae-won had never called him. He had never needed to. He put the phone down.
He stood.
He went to the window. Below, the port was lit in the pre-dawn quiet, the cranes motionless, the water flat and dark. He had stood at this window 1,000 times and looked at what he controlled and felt the specific satisfaction of an order he had built himself. Tonight the view looked different. He was not sure if the view had changed or if he had. He picked up the phone. He did not call his lieutenants. He dialed Lim Byung-soo. It rang 4 times. Then a careful voice, alert despite the hour. The voice of a man who slept lightly and answered unknown numbers from habit. "My name is Kang Jae-won," Jae-won said. "I think you know who I am." A pause. "I do," Lim said. "I have information about a murder you haven't been able to close," Jae-won said. "And evidence that will close it."
"Not in a way that points at me."
Another pause. Longer. "Why are you calling me?" Lim said. "Because you're the only person in this city whose honesty I confirmed by trying to compromise it and failing," Jae-won said. "And because there's a child who needs this to be over." Silence on the line. Then Lim said, "What kind of evidence?" "A drawing," Jae-won said. And then, before Lim could respond, Tae-sik's message arrived. Urgent. 3 words. Sung-jin called the meeting. Jae-won closed his eyes for 1 second. "I need 48 hours, he told Lim. He ended the call. He looked at the port below. He put on his jacket. Incheon Port at midnight was a different city, a working city, indifferent to time and weather, smelling of diesel and cold salt water and the iron weight of containers stacked in towers that disappeared into the dark above the dock lights. Cranes moved against the sky. Somewhere, always, the low bass sound of a ship's engine. Jae-won and Tae-sik arrived in a car that looked like nothing worth noticing. Tae-sik had a recording device running in the breast pocket of his coat. Jae-won had his Beretta in a holster at his back and 11 years of knowing exactly how Park Sung-jin thought, which he considered the more useful of the two. Sung-jin had framed the meeting as an emergency security briefing. Every captain loyal to Jae-won had been called. The location was a port warehouse, Sung-jin's territory, familiar ground, structured to Sung-jin's advantage. The meeting was not, of course, a briefing. Jae-won had known this before he read the invitation. He had gone over the geometry of it in the car with Tae-sik, the angles, the entry points, the number of men Sung-jin could position inside a warehouse of that size without making the architecture look wrong.
He went anyway.
Because his captains were inside, and he would not leave them. The warehouse was large and lit poorly, which served no one's stated purpose, and everyone's actual one. Jae-won's 3 senior captains were already seated at a long table in the center of the floor, flanked by men they had brought and men they had not brought who were Sung-jin's and positioned at the edges of the light. Sung-jin was standing at the head of the table, composed and well-dressed, with the expression of a man who has rehearsed this moment and is satisfied with how it opens. He had not expected Jae-won to walk in. Jae-won walked in. For a moment the room rearranged itself around this fact. Sung-jin's composure remained, but something inside it shifted, a recalculation, rapid and invisible to anyone who is not watching for it. Tae-sik moved to Jae-won's left, positioning himself with the economy of someone who has already mapped the room and knows where the angles are. Jae-won walked to the head of the table, the other head, the one Sung-jin had left for him, and sat down, and in sitting down communicated, without a word, that he had walked into this room knowing exactly what it was and had decided to enter it anyway. "You're late," Sung-jin said, which was the first mistake. It acknowledged that he had been waiting. "I took a different route," Jae-won said. The meeting began. Sung-jin spoke about security protocol, about operational vulnerabilities, about the need for consolidated command. He spoke the way people speak when they are building toward something and want the architecture to seem natural. His men listened. Jae-won's captains listened with the particular attention of people who were beginning to understand that the room they were in was not the room they had been invited to. Jae-won said very little. He was watching. He watched Sung-jin's hands, his sight lines, the frequency with which his eyes moved to the men at the edges. He watched the 2 men near the secondary entrance, whose jackets hung wrong. Tae-sik's hand was at his side. It happened fast, the way these things always do after a long stillness. Sung-jin made a gesture. Nothing theatrical, a simple inclination of the head toward the room's perimeter, and the men at the edges moved. One of Jae-won's captains understood it first. His chair scraped back. He said a word in Korean that was both a warning and a declaration, and then the room broke apart. What followed was not clean. It never was. Tae-sik took a blade across his forearm in the first 30 seconds, not deep, but real, and kept moving. One of Sung-jin's men made for Jae-won directly and discovered, at close range, that 20 years of being the most dangerous person in a room does not atrophy. 2 of Jae-won's captains, understanding finally the shape of what they were inside, turned on Sung-jin's men with the specific fury of people who had been deceived by someone they had trusted. The recording was running the whole time. Sung-jin reached the dock door. The sound of water below. The cranes moving in the dark.
He turned with his weapon raised.
Jae-won was faster. He was standing 2 meters away with the Beretta leveled, and for a moment the dock was very quiet except for the harbor sounds and the distant industrial hum of the port. Sung-jin looked at him. His composure had finally, entirely left. Jae-won lowered the gun. "The prosecutor has the recording," he said. "He has a drawing. He has the phone records from your private line."
He paused.
"You're already finished." He stepped back. He had made this choice in the dark of his office at 3 in the morning, looking at the port through the window. He had made it while Janice was asleep with her notebook under her cheek. He had made it. He understood now. The moment a 7-year-old walked across a city to his desk and placed a composition notebook in front of him and told him, without apology, that nobody looked at him. He left Sung-jin for the law. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He called Lim Byung-soo from the dock. Then he called Tae-sik, who was having his arm wrapped in the car by a man with a medical kit. "Is she okay?" Jae-won said. Tae-sik, holding his forearm with 2 fingers of the opposite hand, said, "She's drawing the brick wall again. She says to tell you she saved your page in the notebook." Jae-won stood at the edge of the dock. Below him, the black water moved in its slow, indifferent way.
He breathed.
He had never, in 20 years, handed anything to a prosecutor voluntarily. He had never chosen consequences over escape. He was not the kind of man who did this. He was, it appeared, no longer certain what kind of man he was. A year is a long time in Seoul. Long enough for a girl to learn 17 new Korean words a week and develop strong opinions about which teachers explained mathematics clearly and which ones did not. Long enough to fill 4 composition notebooks and begin a 5th. Long enough to become a known presence on a particular street in Mapo, the child from the bakery building who walked to school at exactly 8:02 every morning and came home at exactly 4:15 and sometimes stood at the window in the evenings drawing the street below with the focused seriousness of a professional. Long enough for a name on an enrollment form to become, finally, legally and permanently, her own. Janice Adaeze walked through the school gate in a navy uniform on a Wednesday morning in October, 1 year and 3 weeks after a Thursday night in Itaewon when a loaded gun had swung toward a counter 2 feet from her face, and she had not moved. Her hair was in 2 puffs. Yellow rubber bands. Always the yellow ones. She had a social worker named Ms. Park who visited on Tuesdays and brought tangerines and asked careful, respectful questions about how she was doing and listened carefully to the answers. She had a teacher who had noticed, in the first week, that Janice Adaeze drew everything she saw, and who had accordingly placed a sketchpad on her desk as a permanent fixture rather than a distraction to be managed. She had, as of 3 months ago, a friend, a girl named Yuna, who sat 2 rows over and had an opinion about everything and who had decided, with the forthright authority of an 8-year-old, that Janice was going to be her friend whether she had been consulted about this or not. Janice had found that she did not object. She raised her hand more than any other student in class. She had things to say and had recently begun, cautiously, to say them. On a Wednesday morning in October, she walked through the gate and stopped. She turned. Across the road, under a ginkgo tree whose leaves had gone entirely gold and were falling in the early morning breeze in slow, disordered spirals, a dark car was parked in the spot it occupied every morning at 8:15. It was there when the gate opened. It was gone by 8:20. It had been there every school morning for a year. She had known from the first week. She knew the shape of it. She knew the tinted windows and the way it sat with the engine off, and the way the morning light hit the windshield at an angle that was not quite opaque. She had not acknowledged it. Today she stopped. She reached into her bag and took out the composition notebook, the 5th one, half full. She had prepared this page 2 nights ago, at the desk in her apartment with the bakery smell coming up through the floor and the street sounds she had learned like a second language. She had known she would do this eventually. She had been deciding when. She held the notebook up, cover facing outward, toward the black car. On the cover was a drawing. She had drawn it from memory and from the accumulated observation of a year of Wednesdays and morning cars, and the particular way a man stands at a window with his back to a room full of people who will not look at him. It showed a man sitting alone in the back seat of a car, parked under a tree full of leaves. His face was in 3/4 profile. His hands were in his lap. He was looking at a building through a window. Beneath it, in her careful, particular handwriting, Korean and English mixed the way they always were in her notebook, the way 2 languages had grown together in her over 2 years until she could no longer always tell where one ended and the other began. She had written, "Nara, I know you're there." She held it up for a count of 5. Then she put the notebook in her bag, turned, and walked through the gate and into the school. In the back seat of the dark car, Kang Jae-won sat very still. Tae-sik, in the front seat, did not move. The ginkgo leaves came down around the car in their unhurried gold. A bus moved past on the road behind them. A woman walked by with a child on her back and a bag of groceries in each hand and glanced at the car without interest and kept walking. Jae-won looked at the school gate. Janice had gone through it. The gate had closed behind her. He had watched her every morning for a year walk through that gate. He had watched the change in how she walked, not dramatically, not in the way of transformations in stories, but in the real, incremental way of a child who is being fed enough, slept enough, and known enough to put the armor down, slowly, in stages, until the walk becomes something that belongs to her rather than something she is using to survive. He had not gone in. He would not go in. The terms of his arrangement with Lim Byung-soo were precise on this point, as they were precise on a number of points, and Jae-won had agreed to them because they were just, and because Janice needed a life that was hers, and not one that was adjacent to his. But there was no provision in the arrangement that addressed parking on a public street. Tae-sik started the engine. After a moment, Jae-won said, quietly, "She knew." Tae-sik said, "Yes, boss. I expect she's known for some time." Jae-won said nothing else. The car pulled out from under the ginkgo tree and moved into the morning traffic of a city going about its business, ordinary and immense and indifferent to the specific gravity of what had just passed between a man in a car and a girl at a gate. But Jae-won felt it. He felt it the way you feel the particular quality of a moment that has settled something in you that you did not know was unsettled, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. He had spent 20 years making himself into something impenetrable. He had turned off the parts of himself that could be used as doors. He had looked at the city from his window and controlled it and called this sufficiency. And then a 7-year-old Nigerian girl had walked into a cramped convenience store in Itaewon at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday with yellow rubber bands in her hair and a composition notebook under her arm, and had looked at the most dangerous man in Seoul the way she looked at everything, completely, clearly, without flinching, and had drawn his face before she knew his name.
And had seen him.
Not the control. Not the weight. Not the architecture he had built around himself that kept everything out. Him. The car moved through the morning city. Jae-won sat in the back seat and was, for the first time in 20 years, not entirely alone. Across the city in a school in Mapo, a girl with mahogany eyes and yellow rubber bands opened her composition notebook to a fresh page in the quiet before class began. She began to draw. She drew a ginkgo tree dropping golden leaves onto an empty parking space. She drew it carefully. She shaded the empty space where the car had been. She labeled it in small precise letters in the margin. 8:20. She closed the notebook. She raised her hand to answer the question the teacher had just asked. She knew the answer. She had known it from the beginning. The girl who had learned not to cry had finally found someone worth believing in. And the man who had forgotten how to feel had found, at last, the one thing in Seoul he refused to lose. What did you think of Janice and Mr. Kang? Did he make the right choice? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please smash that like button. It means everything to this channel. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.